Hello and welcome to another episode of What Comes Next, a show all about the technologies that will shape your future. I'm Rob Kellner, and as always, I'm joined by Amy Dickens and Kwaku Akamensah. Amy, Kwaku, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I gave blood this morning and had a little bit of a adventure as I nearly fainted. I like to call it my near-death experience. And I had to lie sort of with my legs up in the air in this chair for about 20 minutes while they tipped me back the right way. And then they wouldn't let me leave until I ate something. So, yeah, it was a very dramatic morning for me.
What, they were tipping blood from your legs?
Yeah, they literally put you in this chair that tips you back so the blood all rushes to your head. And then they don't want to tip you back upright too fast because then the blood all rushes out of your head and your blood pressure drops and you get dizzy. So they have to tip you really slowly, like the right way up.
Sounds like they should just leave you alone.
Just leave me with my legs in the air. So yeah, I'm feeling fine now. I've had a piece of chocolate cake, so blood sugar is back to normal.
Very good, yeah.
How are you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. Nothing significant to talk about. It was my 30th birthday last week. So
Happy birthday!
Thank you very much. So a few sort of cumulative...
Welcome to the 30s.
Yeah, mate.
Yeah. No, it's. Kicking off with the podcast. I like that as a good sort of form of celebration. So,
Awesome.
Yeah, I've dealt with it with an appropriate amount of sort of self-loathing and panic, but otherwise doing really well.
And grace.
Have you got any resolutions for your 30s or for your 30th year?
I don't know.
31st.
Really. Yeah.
31st, yeah.
Nothing too exciting. I've signed up for a 10K in December, which...
Nice, okay.
Yeah, it's sort of just trying to sort of be... Well, okay, my usual approach to New Year's resolutions is basically, this is going to sound really pretentious, is that, so as we get older, we're working against like entropy, right? So like if we do nothing, we will get less fit and we could potentially get less intelligent. And so my kind of ideal is every year just to try and...
Dial it up.
Exactly, right. You just have one of those two dials. Hopefully both, usually not, just be a bit higher than before, be a little bit smarter, a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more whatever. So just try and kind of, grow upwards rather than kind of, go down. So that's my usual approach to it. But no, other than just sort of, usual life stuff. No, it's been 20s was a good decade. I'm really looking forward to 30s though.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to like a tiny bit of eminence.
Eminence?
Later, not now.
What is the meaning of the word eminence? Help me out, man.
People sort of... I kind of think when you're in your 20s, people think you don't know stuff, and then you have to prove that you do.
Yeah, that doesn't change anything.
I see.
Yeah. So a bit of sort of luxury afforded in that respect. Just like maybe he does know something.
So what you need to practice now, Rob, is that when I was your age.
Oh my God, exactly. Yeah, I think that's. I do need to get that down. Absolutely.
I've already started doing that with people in the office.
Cool. I'm really excited about today's guest. It's going to be a lot about machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning, neural networks. I'm really excited to kick it off.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Alberto is a genius, although he would never be presumptuous enough to say so. But really excited to get into a chat with him.
Yeah, likewise. I think what V7 Labs are doing, it just seems so incredibly cool. And there are so many different layers and applications. I just can't wait to hear where this conversation goes.
On this episode of What Comes Next, we're looking at machine vision. Now, this isn't as simple as a computer or a phone with a camera. This is about teaching software to do something it finds incredibly difficult, something humans take for granted every day, which is recognizing the difference between different shapes in an image, and then also understanding it's still the same shape when it moves or changes orientation. The power of this technology is pretty incredible. We're talking about breaking down the barriers between the increasingly powerful digital world and the physical world, the visual world where we breathe and eat and sleep. Alberto Rizzoli is here to tell us more. He's the co-founder and CEO of V7 Labs. V7 is a company which has designed a deep learning system to, and I'm quoting V7 here, make machines see like humans. Alberto Rizzoli, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's great to have you on. So let's start off. Can you explain what V7 Labs is up to?
V7 is a platform to develop vision AI. And we took something that normally takes several months to put together, which is a neural network, which allows a machine or a camera to see, and platformized it so that any business can load some images into V7 and define what needs to be identified, And after a few days of work, you get an actual AI that can identify these objects inside images. And its primary industries in which it's used are scientific and medical ones, although technically there is no limit to what images it can load and what it can identify in those images and video.
Okay, so there are two parts here. There's the neural network itself, and then obviously the platform, which makes it kind of accessible and really usable. Let's start with the neural network. Can you give us a kind of neural networking 101? How does this sort of work? How have you built it? What was the kind of history there?
Yeah, neural network is a very egoistical, not even an algorithm. It's just a set of weights that will try to go as quickly as possible towards its goal as it can. In our case at V7, we, or customers on our platform, like the people that might be listening, load images to develop a neural network to do a functionality such as finding cells in blood samples so that they can diagnose HIV, leukemia, or other ailments. Or they might load a histological sample slide, which is a massive image of a piece of tissue, and you can find cancer cells in it. The neural network is the model, a set of weights. I refuse to call it algorithm because unfortunately it's not the case, that will find these cells. And we'll do it in the quickest way possible given the data that it's being fed.
Okay, and it's called a neural network because it's loosely designed on kind of how we believe that the human brain processes information.
Exactly. It's an apt name that has really been taken out of context, but nonetheless is still the closest thing that we have in computer science and outside of biology that represents the brain. It started in 1956. Two Swedish scientists took a cat, and the poor thing, they poked a hole in its head to put an electrode. Swedish science was very advanced at the time, and they were able to read the cat's mind. So obviously it was sedated, and this is actually an operation that we do nowadays to people if they have certain types of paralysis. It's simply a way of reading brain cells, and in this case they did it on the visual cortex. And what they found is that the cat was responding randomly to being shown images. These neurons were firing randomly, and they couldn't figure out what it meant until they showed it just a line. And when they showed it a line on a projector screen, the neuron fired. And then they realized that there are layers to this. And the earliest layers recognize simple things like lines. And as you go deeper into the visual cortex, you recognize more complex things like faces of other cats in that example, or their favorite food, whatever they might be. And there are currently 6 recognized layers in the human brain, V1 through V6, and we named V7 after a hypothetical 7th layer of the visual cortex that we could embed into machines to make them more intelligent.
Such a cool name, by the way.
That's really cool. So do you find that you were saying the V1 through V6, is that in conjunction with developmental stages? I mean, is it like as we develop, we develop V1 and we learn to see basic shapes, or?
I'd wish we could do it during a lifetime, but we do it only in evolution. So humans have 6 from birth.
Evolutionary. Okay.
And they're simply, much like neural network, they are filled with weights and information. Okay. But it's evident that you start with something in those layers. Yeah. You are born and then you immediately recognize a face and you're like, oh, I like that.
But the end result is a platform that can recognize a white blood cell in a picture or a sort of an image from a microscope. Yeah. It can detect what is a white blood cell and different kinds of white blood cells within that image. Exactly.
That's unstructured data to us. We see a picture, or let's say a person who's never studied medicine sees that picture and doesn't recognize patterns. Their brain might recognize the boundaries of a cell, but they wouldn't be able to tell that one has cancer whilst the other one is healthy. A neural network can embed in itself this unstructured information like a educated human would. And the cool thing about V7 is that we made it so that you can develop a prototype really quickly, because we platformized the work of data scientists that they would normally take several months or a year to put together into something where you can load some pictures, and usually within a week you have a running neural network prototype. And then within a few months of iterating and adding more data, you have something that can reliably detect those systems and those elements.
How much data would be required in order to teach this system?
Good question. It sounds incredibly high, but if you're going for under 1,000 pictures, you're not going to get very good results. And if you think about it, 1,000 is a 0.1% statistical accuracy. So it's already not a large data set. But if you want something that is deployed in medical cases, then you're going for at least 20,000 for a very small case, or millions for cases in which the objects to find are particularly hard to detect, or simply there's a lot of data available, so why not?
Sure. So would this maybe be the difference between so how about X-ray data of specific types of fractures where there are, I'm going to butcher this because my medical knowledge is poor, but let's say 4 or 5 different types of main fractures that there are, as opposed to cell types, where if you're naming lots of different cell types, there could be hundreds.
Exactly. So the amount of entropy that you have in those images will define how quickly the network will learn. If you have a binary thing, so there is a fracture in this little bone or there isn't, then it will learn it quite quickly. There are very few edge cases in that. If instead you're trying to define a full scan body Star Trek style from an MRI, there can be thousands of variables, and it will take a lot of data to single them all out, because the network will cheat to find the quickest way to learning. And it's quite evident when you automate a lot of the development of AI into a platform like ours, or in general, when you're doing it on your own, you realize that it's really the quality of your data that sometimes matters most.
And what's the margin of error in terms of, like, let's say for cancer cells, for your technology looking for specific cancer cells versus a human eye doing it? What's the error rates there?
It depends.
Okay.
But in some cases, you can achieve better than human performances.
Wow,
Certainly
okay.
better than the average human from the start. But then to beat a radiologist or a clinician, you need to cover as many edge cases as a clinician that has seen potentially thousands of them.
Okay.
Right, but the cool thing here is that your data set could include 20 of the top radiotherapists from around the world.
From every patient around the world, every person, every type of gender, age, sex. It could be a very varied sample that the average, say, doctor maybe in France might have not been able to see, which also brings both an amazing consideration for the amount of learning that a computer can do, but also thinking about the fact that all this data is being centralized into one system that could take away some of the work of others. So there's AI obviously has this inverse funnel effect where it's taking all of our knowledge collective in every area, whether it's driving, diagnosing people, making food, and then centralizing it into a product that will one day maybe look like an iPhone, and you plug it into something and it'll have the knowledge of the world's best doctor.
Is it an oversimplification to say that the distance between an AI having better kind of image recognition than an amateur, getting to a place where it's better than a sort of a professional with a lot of expertise, is the thing holding the AI back just information, just training data?
In some cases, yes. In cases, let's say the 2D data, like a fracture or an X-ray, has been so widely explored that we can safely say that algorithms or models are beating humans at it. There are certain data domains which are so multifaceted that we're not that good at modeling them in AI. Like 3D data is a difficult one, but let's say 4D. Let's say there's 3D over time, or let's just say that it's the behavior of a person. Psychiatric data, extremely hard. We can take some hints from the way people message one another, if it's written text or inflections in their voice. But there are things that a psychiatric expert will catch that are very hard for us to annotate. How do you represent them in a video, in a photo, in audio? Do you have to mix all of these together? That becomes hard because it's harder to teach the AI about these things.
I find just having this discussion right now over these past 10 minutes has given me so much more respect for the brain and how completely complex it is.
Right.
Do you find that as you're kind of developing the technology that there's just more and more of the brain that
my
blows your mind?
co-founder, Simon Edwardson in particular, has been developing B7 whilst at the same developing his own personal neural network, which is his 2-year-old son, and comparing comparing the platform's development to his son. And in the beginning, the AI was really beating little Simon's son, but then after 2 years, it just simply took off. The thing can talk sentences, whilst we're still struggling with that in AI research with maybe 45,000 machine learning scientists nowadays trying to solve these hard problems.
That's actually amazing, having that done in real time. Yeah. That's really cool.
So I actually want to take a step back for a second and just talk about kind of image recognition generally, because I imagine that in the field of image recognition, maps one of the communication issues is that it's something so innate to humans. It's perhaps hard to, people don't always understand how difficult it is to get to kind of configure a computer, an algorithm to perform image recognition accurately.
It used to be that image recognition was treated like any software program. You would manually say, hey, if you identify this, then you're going to fetch this image. And this was very on rails. That's why if you look at the earliest iPhone or iOS or Android apps, with any kind of image recognition, they would pattern match things. They would find the cover of a book and match it with something else, because that is extremely structured on rails programming that you can do. Whilst this new stuff, the magical AI stuff that we like to see now in the news, is unstructured. And it's this new wave of image recognition that took over since 2012, when they started using graphics cards to process AI. Before, we were doing everything manually, and now a good comparison is deep learning and this modern machine learning field is like taking a starting point at a glacier and an end point where you want the river to end up, and let the river find its own course. Whilst previously we were basically digging out the tunnel and saying, hey, you should turn over here to optimize the slope and then do this. But now it's fluid.
I like that visual.
So most of the image recognition systems in production nowadays are still not using deep learning. Very few of them are. Most of them are by big tech companies that are finding either inappropriate images online, sometimes hate, but it doesn't work very well. And now in some of the more meaningful fields, they're just starting to appear in production. There's some amazing work being done in medicine, in different types of scans, and obviously also in commercial products.
The other half of this is the platform, right? So it's and Darwin is the sort of the main V7 platform and product at the moment. So could you describe, if you're a doctor or someone who works in kind of medical imaging, what is the experience of using Darwin kind of from start to finish?
Nowadays, if you're a doctor, you will usually mark or annotate an image by placing an arrow and saying, hey, here's what's wrong with this patient. This process is very similar to how you train vision AI. So on Darwin, you would add images to the platform and annotate them. That is the first step is obviously you manage a data set, and this is something that a data scientist would understand. They're very things that need to be filtered, versioned, and then remixed so that you could take a subsample of a data set, maybe that is only from one country or from one patient, and so on.
And so, just to interrupt, so annotation is literally you take a picture of a sort of a blood sample, and there are lots of different cells. And manual annotation is draw a circle around a cell and say, this is a red blood cell. That's what annotation is, right?
Exactly. And this is being done now every day by thousands of people around the world for autonomous driving, for example. People are drawing around cars every day, every hour of their life till they go to sleep. And this is to push this new technology forward. So there is an enormous amount of human effort into creating automation. This human effort is generally done very repetitive fashion. What we've done within Darwin is automate a lot of the annotation. There's a tool called Auto Annotate, which uses an existing AI within the platform to help you annotate things. So in medical cases, you might have these cells and then you simply draw a rough box around them, and Auto Annotate will complete the rest and will draw a perfect mask around the actual cell. Or it can even be done in the wild images, like let's say it's a picture of a cat on the floor. You'll draw a box around the cat's head, and the AI will say, hey, yeah, this looks like it's probably a head, and make a segment around it. And this is done to then train an AI to find these objects and to understand that, hey, yeah, I'm supposed to detect cats' heads or cells. Sorry for the comparisons to cats. It's usually a easier domain to imagine in your head if you're not really working in microscopy.
You know, it's funny, doing the research for this, all the examples I found were of cats. So kind of image recognition, So how do you describe to a computer what a cat is? Sure. And it was all the examples were in cats. So it's funny that's kind of a universal thing for
They've been an internet mascot for so long that there's so much cat data available online.
I'm here for it.
So I want to just talk quickly about the power of the platform. So an example that's on the V7 website is identifying components within a farm. So the silo and cornfield or that kind of thing. So once you supply enough kind of training data, so enough kind of pictures of farms, just to follow this slightly odd example, maybe the kind of thing you could do is basically show Darwin a series of pictures from like a high resolution satellite, a series of high resolution satellite imagery, and basically count the number of silos, let's say, in the US, right?
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing. So I just want to kind of express the kind of power of this, right? Because it's extraordinary.
That's mental.
It's I mean, yeah,
That's crazy.
And presumably even more powerful for things like you said earlier, for microscopy images of blood, where you're counting white blood cells quickly, that kind of thing.
And that can work for every machine in the world. The same algorithm that you end up the same model you end up creating. In fact, that silo example's on our website, v7labs.com. If you want to check it out, it's a short video at the bottom. It took a day to make. We just had this video of a drone flying around a farm, and you could see the silo from it. We put some of the images in Darwin. I think it was 350 of those images, and we simply annotated that this is a large silo, this is a small silo. And then we said, well, this is just a demo for the front page of the website. Let's train a network on it. Then we ran the network, and the result is what you see on the site, which is these silos are being identified. The masks are a bit jittery, but the AI that you could then put on top of this drone is identifying these corn silos. This came as an inspiration. There were these forest fires happening at the same time in California, and then later in Sweden. And helicopters were looking for water sources at the time. And we thought there's so many swimming pools that you can see on Google Maps and so many water sources. You could easily create an AI that can then scan the canvas of a country or an area and then say, hey, the closest swimming pool or water source is a lake, 5 kilometers that way. And you could do that in a short amount of time. It's becoming almost hackathon material to create certain artificial intelligence models.
That's just so cool.
That's incredible.
Coming from a part of the world that suffers from forest fires regularly, I would love to see something like that happen. That's
incredible. I mean, and so you could conceivably just give this data to, just say, okay, right, dear the Californian Fire Department, here is every body of water over X size in the vicinity of whatever area.
Yeah, now AI is super new and a little harder to access, but I think it will become like that. It will become a much more abundant resource if we learn how to share it properly and share both the data and the end results.
I just love the idea of someone sitting next to their swimming pool and a big bucket coming down from a helicopter. This is a terribly simplistic way to look at it, but just bucket coming down from a helicopter. Yeah. Sorry, mate. We found you on the algorithm.
What other weird and wonderful problems have you seen people trying to solve with AI at the moment?
We've seen all kinds of things from learning languages visually, which is one of my favorite cases because I'm a bit of a visual learner, where you would point a camera, usually your phone, to something and then learn or hear what they're called in a different language so that you have this immediate feedback. To the research community is really into identifying species of animals. So if you do become a data scientist working in vision, you also become a botanist and a zoologist as well, since most data sets include all kinds of bird species and flower species, since they have these little minute varieties that an expert can see, but the regular person doesn't bat an eye at.
Yeah.
So when I was reading Rob's kind research about this topic, one of the ideas that I thought might be quite interesting for a platform like this would be bioassays. At the moment, essentially, if you find out what aquatic microbes are in a certain part of the ocean by going there, taking a sample, and then sticking that underneath a microscope and basically counting the microbes inside it, so whether it be plankton or whatever. But depending on the microbes or the organisms that are in that sample, you can take a kind of decent estimate how healthy that ocean life is. But you can imagine that if there were an aquatic drone that was taking these samples, it would be able to look at, it would be able to process that data and see through the images that it's looking at whether or not this area was healthy, whether it wasn't healthy, whether it was something that we should be concerned about, all that kind of thing.
It's a very poetic future, like a friendly water, nature preserving
I
drone.
was brought up on Captain Planet, man.
Yeah.
I always hope it goes that way.
Those are some of the most good-looking, close macro, I guess, visuals of seeing pond life and water life. And actually, I've been looking for people doing research in this space simply to develop a case study with beautiful visuals of this marine life. So if anyone out there is working with any kind of aquatic life at a small scale, the ones that twirl around in the field of view of a scope, get in touch and maybe we can work something out.
One of the most extraordinary things is that, so we've put a couple of examples of things, and you said, yes, we could do that, yes, we could do that. You mentioned there's kind of nothing that this technology couldn't do, right? In terms of imagery, in terms of sort of feeding a data set and then saying, right, count how many of this thing in a certain area or that kind of thing. There is no limit to this.
It can't open a door, and it can't... if you put a cookie inside the cookie jar, it disappears. There's no concept of object permanence in most vision AI.
Okay.
That's why it's hard to make robots that actually act with AI. Be very skeptical of full robotic intelligence for some time, because it requires facets of intelligence that right now we are just sweeping under the rug when it comes to AI. But when it comes to seeing things and recognizing things as soon as they're seen, that becomes a very, very good domain for modern AI to work in.
When you say micro expressions, what do you mean?
The notion is, for example, a face is a great canvas to plot in a grid and find its minute differences. And our brain does it perfectly. We look at a face, we just plot it inside our head and somehow understand who this person is and whether they're happy or angry at us. And that's... in the end, it's mostly because a face is like a canvas of data in a way. And if you have enough of those, which is one of the most widely available imagery, you can find these minute differences between them. It looks a little less impressive when you do it with people's faces. But for example, you might be able to identify a person by their gait, by the way they walk, from surveillance video. There are research papers about this being released. And that becomes quite incredible. The way you walk is data. And this data can be understood by an AI. And it can be used to identify who you are from a security camera, which is not, but very, very few cases, a good thing.
I find this kind of discussion on micro expressions really interesting because as you say, the human eye or the human brain is very good at kind of recognizing these different expressions, and and there's the possibility now to train this technology to understand these expressions. But with the human brain, you have this additional layer of like self-doubt and questioning. There's a whole emotional journey. So you might read an expression as anger, and then as a human are sitting there thinking, oh, but was it anger, or are they just... what's going on? Like you have that kind of questioning going on, but with this machine learning, presumably it's not going to have that.
Very stoic.
It's not going to have that element of doubt.
There are so many use cases for this kind of technology. With so much out there, how do you choose what to work on, where to direct your efforts? I know part of it is the platform, so it's open to people. They can kind of go their own direction.
Yeah.
But how do you choose what to work on next?
We get personally involved in very few of the projects happening on V7. It's usually when the team wants our team's involvement as well. We're building something that is truly greenfield and brand new, whilst others, they upload their data and they create algorithms that have been developed in the last year or so. But nonetheless, they don't require any additional R&D, and we never see any of that data. So we technically don't know what they might be working on. Nonetheless, when it comes to what we choose, it's usually the feasibility of it and the impact. In the cases that we work on in the medical and scientific space, they're both industries have cases where the data is available, such as blood, such as histological samples, such as recently we've been awarded a small grant to work on Barrett's esophagus. It's images of the human esophagus that have an infection that could turn into cancer. And then there's the feasibility. In the case that I just described, it's understanding that this infection is starting to turn into it's emitting signals that could mean that cancer is being formed. And then this can be a decision support system to prioritize certain patients to be sent to a gastroenterologist immediately if these signs are being identified, as opposed to, hey, you have the same infection that you had last time. It's obviously it's Barrett's esophagus is not great, but you will be fine. So the combination of these two, impact and feasibility, are the two things we consider.
When I was looking at the name V7 and the idea of adding, I guess, an additional facet onto human sight, or how it currently exists, I thought about how many other types of vision are possible. So, UV, infrared, X-ray vision, heat sensitivity. Would it be feasibly possible at some point in time for, I guess for a data set to be filtered down into those that were interesting samples, and then for further lenses to be put onto that? So really enhancing our sight to that next level of what it could be.
Yeah, we've been manufacturing digital sensors since the 90s in RGB because we were the only intelligent eye that could look at those images and judge them. We didn't create security. We convert the colors into faux infrared by painting it red and blue if it's cold. But now we've created a new intelligence. We're basically creating the mantis shrimp, which can see in the full spectrum almost. And we might be creating cameras that can see the full spectrum and feed it into AI, which will learn from it. So we're essentially creating almost a huge superhuman version of our sight system, our visual system.
And I guess for thinking about some of the applications for this, that I know one of the big areas where, big sort of research scientific space which uses different sort of non-visible forms of light is astronomy, because simply just there's not enough information almost contained in visible light to analyze things like stars and kind of distant galaxy formations, that kind of thing. So I assume this is a perfect example for that. Astronomical data and analyzing that and being able to spot patterns and planets, new systems forming, that kind of thing.
It is, and astronomy has had this amazing crowdsourced effort to find these celestial bodies by people online who contributed their time, and now that data can be used to create AI that can automate that process, and obviously also in multispectral views. A similar case has been protein folding, where it's not a visual domain mostly, but humans have been visually folding proteins because algorithms weren't very good at this. There used to be a game called Fold It. You could download it on your laptop and then start folding proteins. And there was a woman from a rural part of the US, which was one of the best in the world at folding these proteins. It's like a puzzle game. And now we've created this AI that can read unstructured data, these neural network-based AIs, which is now really beating us at this game that we used to be so proudly better at.
So I want to talk now about just some of the implications or use cases, sort of maybe current that people don't know about, or near term or far off.
I know, what is something that you might want to be able to immediately see and learn about? What if something could immediately scan something in front of you or on you, and what would you like to learn?
So, something that this is probably not sort of that exciting, but it's kind of close to my heart, which is that I can see a use in this where basically I would take a picture of my skin and it would look at my moles and it would say if there's anything kind of risky going on. Because I imagine that's something that's not, given what you described, too difficult, maybe?
No, there's several groups working on moles, and I think it's eventually will become a smartphone technology to analyze some of these, maybe with some added lights to create some better visuals.
Right, so that's mine ticked.
Moles is one of the first things a computer vision person looks into when they're interested in the medical field, because we have them on us, they're there, but it's starting to become more and more available resource to actually get your mole scanned with a mobile device with an added component on top of it.
Yeah, I think health would be one thing that I would be really interested in. Anything that means I don't have to wait 3 weeks to see a GP. Like if there was something that was fairly reliable in, okay, yeah, this is something you should maybe see a real human about, or this is something that, statistically speaking is probably fine. I think that's interesting. But I also think what Rob brought up about space, like that's what I would really love to see, is when we can start mapping different star systems, or if we get to the point where we can start sending things out into space that can take these pictures from further afield, like that's space just blows my mind all the time. So that for me would be the thing, I think.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that'd probably be my first choice. The second, I guess, you spoke about the discovery of new species. I think what would be amazing is if you had one of these like high altitude drones that was taking pictures of different areas of, let's say, rainforest. But if you could compare let's say, the number of certain types of trees, the number of certain types of, I don't know, let's say like a river or some other feature of the surroundings, but based on the data that you knew about that area of rainforest, so whether it has a high number of species or low, you could fly a drone over the rainforest and tell you where the most likely areas to find new species were, or where the most biodiverse areas were, both for exploring, but also for the tree hugging protection that I'm so into.
That'd be quite amazing. We're starting to lose a lot of this biodiversity before we even record it.
Right.
Something very exciting that is starting to emerge is unsupervised learning becoming more and more feasible. What we technically have been talking about is the field of supervised learning, where the AI is being told by the human, this is a cell, this is a cat, this is a dog, and sometimes the dog is even being outlined with a mask. So you would draw the pixels that represent the dog, and then draw a pixel that represents the dog's nose. This is how, for example, portrait mode is done if you have a smartphone from the last 2 years. It's simply a neural network that knows what person pixels look like. And then it blurs out anything that is not a person pixel to give you the effect that it's a DSLR picture. It's not an optical effect, it's a digital one. But we're starting to be able to develop models that can do this without any human supervision. So they learn on their own based on feedback loops, or simply based on the diversity of the data, and then they give their own name to what a cat is, because they see these things in all these images without us having to tell it that it's a cat in every single picture.
So you're effectively talking about a new language.
It could develop its own language.
If they develop their own word for, let's say, cat. I mean, am I getting crazy here if I'm saying that they'll start, if they're inventing their own nouns? Is there a future in inventing like a grammar system and verbs and?
Yeah, if you let the concept unravel, and let's say that you were to throw one of these things into a person where modern society hasn't made an era where modern society hasn't made contact, then it could develop its own knowledge of the world and make its own assumptions. Obviously, all based on data.
Sure.
We don't exactly know how good it's going to be to us, but yeah.
That's fascinating, though. That's really fascinating.
One of the things that popped to mind was like hieroglyphs. So if we found,
you mean emojis?
No. if we found a bunch of scrolls, right, in underneath the Sphinx's paw or something like that. Google that.
Conspiracy theories 101.
Don't get me started. And we didn't know how to read those. Is there any way that we could use something like this to read them and make sense of them?
Yeah, like code breaking.
Because it requires annotation. We wouldn't have the annotation of each symbol. So would it be useful there? Yeah,
we currently have a PhD in manuscript recognition at V7.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so he's been doing a lot of research in the past years, and he'll be with us for the next few months on understanding these extremely convoluted manuscripts with computer vision, because there are so many of these pages. And there's a part of it that is recognizing the actual characters, which are in Latin or known alphabets. And then there's a part of it of, hey, there's this symbol that keeps reappearing. What are the patterns for this? And that becomes a cryptography problem almost. And you can apply AI to cryptography because as I mentioned before, it's good at finding the shortest path to success in finding results in unstructured data, like an image. But also cryptography can be unstructured data. So what's the quickest way to guessing your password? Usually we brute force things, but a system that is catered to finding the quickest way to that would try your significant other's name with a date, maybe your dog's name, and find out all this information, and then just try different methods. So we took a tangent into cryptography from archaeology, but yeah.
It's interesting. So, taking that archaeology example, would that be, okay, we know what 27 of these 50 characters are likely to be. We know how they were used in a similar culture that we've managed to understand, and then to infer what the others might mean and try and match that against what a historical record might look like, something like that.
Yeah, I feel like if you have to guess 25 of them,
you're probably not doing too well.
It's also a case where you might just want to use human intelligence for it.
And one interesting example of that actually is that the earliest days of cryptography involved kind of the classic kind of like kid-style cryptography where you just change one letter or number for another, right? In a sort of predictable way. And the way that was eventually, the way that you can decode that is that certain letters are more common than others, right? So you can scan a massive encoded text and you can say, right, that this is the most common character. It's Y, that's probably E in the English language. And so maybe you could do something similar where you take sort of this kind of, sort of the hieroglyphs and say, okay, well, this figure is most common. What are the most common things? Weather changes, the sun,
right,
Pharaoh or whatever. And but using this technology, you can scan and say, okay, well, out of all these characters, this is the most common character. That, but you can do it very quickly, right? So that's the sort of melding of the two. There's also another example that I think is fantastic. It's on the website, which is about looking for impurities. I think in manufacturing, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a particular kind of
quality control.
Yeah, exactly right. Quality control. But I'm thinking that, so this is, I think the example was a particular kind of soldering.
Yeah, it's a turbine in that case. It's a picture of a turbine that has some welds, and you want to make sure that the weld has been done correctly. Welding is an extremely hard thing to do, especially in aerospace engineering. And AI or vision AI manufacturing is starting to make a very good foothold. It's actually been used previously in amazing ways. If you've ever eaten a nut that is not in a shell, that's been seen by an AI, well, not exactly an AI, a computer vision algorithms developed maybe in the 80s. And it uses the perfect lighting conditions and the perfect shutter speed of the camera to detect that a nut has no shell or that the shell is somewhere else. And then it uses a jet of air to blow away that little shell. You can watch videos online of it. It's mesmerizing, the level of on-rails engineering that has been done so that we can eat almonds without the shell on it.
That's incredible. That's really...
We are very spoiled now because we have these algorithms that figure out how to find the shells on their own without any of the perfect lighting, without any of the shutter speed. The algorithm just says, like, okay, well, I'll disaccount for the lighting because it doesn't seem to help me define these pixels, and then it'll slowly learn what the shells look like. And similarly in manufacturing, if you have unpredictable cases, such as an imperfection that might occur in only a few of the manufacturing products that you have, then a neural network can detect what is normality and what is not normality and spot it.
I love that it's getting there, and we can see a day where you could have, a sort of almost a robotic avatar with a camera connected to a Darwin-like platform that would just monitor a production line and would just sound alarm if there was some imperfection, some small mistake that eventually the human eye couldn't see.
Yeah, the human control aspects are really promising for a lot of these cases. The automated controls are in the inception and also very exciting. We're still learning how to make it learn in edge cases, but in repetitive cases, you can learn by observation nowadays. There are researchers that are showing videos of a person taking a sandwich and putting it in a box, and then a robot arm is able to replicate this without having any a priori knowledge or any previously shown samples of this type of activity, which is quite amazing. It doesn't do it with the finesse of a human yet, but it's getting there.
So Alberto, if people want to follow what's going on with V7 Labs, where should they go?
The best way to follow us is on Twitter at V7 Labs. That's the letter V for Victoria and then the number 7, or v7labs.com. That's where you'll find most of our information. And that's our main sources of social media.
Alberto Rizzoli, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. A 2-year-old versus an algorithm. Like that was a really interesting takeaway point. I love what you were saying about that, Amy.
Yeah, I really I have such a new respect for the human mind. And I've always been fascinated by the brain and the way it works. But when you start to unravel the fact that, these machines can't sense depth, or they can't sense the difference between two cats of a different color, or things like that, it just really starts to make me appreciate even a 2-year-old mind is like just leaps and bounds beyond what we've been able to develop.
Absolutely. Something that kept kind of popping into my mind was that this is really a way of connecting digital intelligence and organic intelligence, because for most organic intelligences, especially humans, sight is the biggest source of information we have, right? It's the biggest sense, the most kind of useful thing that we have in terms of navigating the world. And so any technology that has a relationship with us has to be, I think, first visual in an interesting way. It can be, obviously there's language, but if anything, language is kind of more complicated because it's an invention of the mind, which is the most complicated thing. And so as machines navigating the world, perceiving the world as we want them to, being sympathetic to our needs, something that converts the visual world into kind of the digital world is just so important. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, he took it right. He took the conversation right from the comparison with a child's mind and that overtaking, arguably some of the most impressive algorithms that the world has to offer right now, all the way to, I wrote this down, this quote that he had. He said, "We will eventually need to integrate AI to become a functioning part of our society." And it's like, okay, cool. So he gets the idea that AI at the moment is being purposed in one direction only, or, it's being told to do something for us. But what about when, it becomes general? What about when it has to actually interact with us and we might not have, the controls over it that we do today? I love the idea that he's thinking that far ahead.
I think one of the things that really struck me was this sort of idea of the binary, really. So what he's developed is incredibly complex, but yet it's still essentially, and forgive me if I'm butchering his technology, but it's still essentially a yes or no situation. It's yes, this is this thing, or no, this is not this thing. Whereas what he's talking about in sort of the future of where this is going is adding in those extras, the yes buts and the no buts. Like, yes, this is this thing, but it's a different color. Or yes, it's this thing, but it's from a different angle, or it's a slightly different shape, or, the kind of layers are what's coming next.
Yeah.
And that really...
Yeah, I love that.
That's really fascinating.
I love that idea of layering, right? Like, okay, so yes, this is a pipette. No, it's not full. Yes, it is close enough to the agar jelly. No, it is not at, I don't know, room temperature or whatever it might be. Like, that's so cool.
Science with Kwaku.
You start to get this level of nuance that quickly becomes really, really useful. But you can see how it's being patterned. I also, again, coming back to the human mind thing, it's like, man, this is how far back we're having to pedal in order to understand the complexity of how the human mind works. That's
we're talking about evolutionary steps back, not even just within a lifetime.
Yeah, that was a cool thing that he said, right? It's I wish that we could do this in one lifetime, but it's in evolutionary time or something like that. Yeah,
absolutely. Something that we began to touch on, there's just so much more to talk about, is like the Darwin platform itself. And for anyone who's really interested, you can just go and use Darwin for free. Like that you can completely go on and it will interpret and map images for you. I think there are 3 different kind of packages that you can use Darwin for. One, I think, is fee charging, but the other one, they're free. So you can just go on and use it and upload photos, and you can use, that's the incredible thing of just the fact that this is helping to democratize the power of neural nets and deep learning. So the fact that I, as someone who has, never studied machine learning or deep learning or neural networks of any kind, can use that power in some way. It's just incredible, and it's just such a powerful way of bringing this technology to people.
It is really interesting. Imagine trying to explain to somebody pre-Google what this engine will be able to do, and I have a feeling that what we're looking at here is a decision-making tool that is going to be that kind of level of importance. Like, instead, people are going to be asking, what, you used to make decisions on your own before? And whereas that might be scary, so how accurate do you want your decision-making to be? Like, you can now make a decision with the accuracy of the 10,000 most experienced experts in that domain. Like, wow, that is literally superhuman powers.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of What Comes Next. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions about anything we've discussed on today's show, or any comments, or would like to share your own game-changing innovation on what comes next, then drop us an email. We're at wcn@granttree.co.uk. Thank you very much again, and see you next time.